Hi, everybody. I'm Kevin Simons with St. James Music Press, and welcome to our second radio show. We are calling these COVID conversations because we are trying to figure out different and new ways of being church and being church musicians. And so we're talking with some folks who have really great insight into best practices and trying to struggle through all of this together. So I encourage you to use the comments function, and we'll get to questions as we have them. We're really lucky tonight to have with us Dr. Marty Burnet. Dr. Burnet is the brand spanking new Director of Chapel Music and Associate Professor at the Virginia Theological Seminary. And I've known Marty for many years, and glad to welcome you, Marty, to our second SJMP radio show. So welcome.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm thrilled to be here, and a big fan of St. James Music Press for many years. So it's a great resource.
Thank you. We're so glad to have you here. And we're going to get to, the different hats that Marty wears, not the least of which is being president of the Association of Anglican Musicians. But more importantly, how is the move from Nebraska to Virginia? Are you settled in? I mean, when did you get there? Because I thought you might still be in like a caravan in Idaho somewhere.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I moved in the middle of June, and moving during a pandemic was an interesting experience. But I made it here, and I am settled in. Students are starting to arrive, so that's good. Great. It's been kind of quiet on campus this summer, but I've been able to do a lot of work preparing for my courses, so that's been good. And doing most of my teaching online coming up this semester, so I'm preparing for that.
Yeah, that's a whole new universe, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to be doing a lot of teaching online too, and having to figure all of that out. So, one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about, because you are on the front line of getting all of this information coming out as president of the Association of Anglican Musicians. They've helped to sponsor a really important study about performing music during the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of questions the study's hoping to answer?
Sure. The study and research is sponsored by the National Federation of State High School Associations, and they have coordinated a coalition of over 100 music organizations now who've joined on board to help support this research that's really geared specifically toward music, instrumental and vocal music, and what mitigations can be made to make it safer, looking at the aerosol transmission of the virus particularly. So there's research going on both in Colorado and Maryland, and both of those studies are giving us some really interesting results, even though it's early, some things that we can use with our ensembles.
So what has been the role of in this whole thing? I mean, usually church musicians don't get too involved in medical research. What's been your role, and what's been ALM's role in this?
Well, we were really pleased to be able to make a grant to support this research. Has an endowment fund, and we were able to use the proceeds of that fund through the interest that's generated to make grants for worthwhile projects in church music. And what could be more worthwhile than this research? Yeah. It applies to what all of us are doing, what we need to do to keep our singers safe. And it wasn't coming from any other sources. So it was important for musicians to be able to see that this research is done. So ALM's role has been to support the coalition, both financially, and I've been going to the meetings twice a month to hear the progress of the research. And then I've been trying to summarize the findings that particularly relate to singers and church music, the kind of work that we're doing, to try to condense them into an easy to understand form. There's a great website where you can access all of the information and watch the videos and read all the scientific formulas, but I've tried to put it into some simple steps that will be relevant to our work.
Yeah, and we've got Amy, I think, has got links to all of that stuff going on. So I encourage you to check out not just the original stuff, but I mean, it's a lot to plow through, and you've plowed through it for us, which is really great. So before we talk maybe about, and we're not going to really talk about what we should do, because there's a lot of questions that are still out there, but sort of what recommendations, or what your thinking might be right now. Can you tell us maybe, before we talk about that, a little about the timeline with the study and sort of what we can expect and what's maybe already happened?
Sure. The study was set up to begin in the late spring, early summer, which it did. The research is proceeding. They're finding preliminary results and releasing those as they have them, but that's highly unusual in a scientific study.
Right.
They're going to wait and publish when it's completely done, but people are so eager for information, they're publishing some things ahead of time so that people can know what to do. The study is going to run through the end of the year, and they expect to have things finished in November and December, as I understand it, and then publishing those results. And then, of course, the scientific process is that other groups will try to replicate those results, so the study will be ongoing. But this gives us a great first round of information.
Yeah, and it's not just and I think I forgot to say this a little earlier, but it's not just for singing, right? I mean, they're also looking at instrumental music and other forms of music making, right?
Absolutely. They're looking at instrumental and vocal music, theater, so actors.
Oh, great. Okay.
Speaking on the stage, public speaking, all of those things. They started with instrumental music studies because so many of the college and high school bands go back to band camp. Some of you remember band camp who are watching this in the heat of August.
I never did. So
that's why I signed up for choir, right?
Right.
But yeah, so they were particularly concerned, because this primary group is Association of Teachers. If we are going back to school, if our district has decided to go back to school, how do we keep our students safe? Yeah. So since the instrumentalists were coming back first, they started there, and now we're getting the results on vocal music and speaking, and we're going to continue to get more data on those. Yeah,
because I've seen some recommendations come out for band directing, and we just now have gotten the preliminary, their preliminary thoughts about what's going on with singing. So could you maybe, I know we have your summary, which is really excellent and clear, but can you give us maybe your headlines from that? What your your big takeaways are from that?
Yeah. The first thing I think that needs to be said is that we cannot eliminate risk. Anything that we do right now, other than sitting at home in a properly ventilated room by ourselves, is going to create risk. So it's a matter of mitigating risk and making wise choices. So the researchers right now are talking about 4 primary categories that we need to look at, which are mask, time, distancing, and airflow.
Okay.
So you can look at the document and see my summary of those recommendations, but all of those work together to make a safer environment, and all of them need to be considered. For masks, basically, I mean, the first bullet point I put on there is that masks are to be worn at all times, indoors.
Yeah, while singing, right? I mean,
while singing,
right?
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of places that are not doing that.
Yeah,
and that's contrary to the recommendations right now that everybody should be wearing a mask at all times.
Yeah.
So the other big thing that came out in this most recent round of research is that a lot of the masks we see people wearing when they sing are not as effective as they should be. The mask should be tightly fitting around the nose and mouth. They said a good guideline is to see if your mask leaves a mark on your face when you take it off.
And
if it does, that's a good thing.
Okay.
If it doesn't, it's probably too loose and too many aerosols are being emitted while we're singing. So I think that was an interesting thing to think about.
Well, and so many of why this is so, it's maybe even more crucial for church musicians to understand than even some other, some other music makers is we tend to work in poorly ventilated spaces,
Mhm.
that aren't necessarily getting air changes all the time. And we may be the only expert that they have, to figure out how our singers can be safe and how we can be safe.
Mhm.
You
And
know,
it's right down to it. The church that I just left after a number of years of service, Trinity Cathedral in Omaha, the nave was built in 1883.
right,
The air system is not
right,
modern, and we
right.
can't control that. So it becomes even more important to control the things that we can, like masks, to make sure that we're using that mitigation strategy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the other big thing I thought was about time, which was not something I had really heard about before you published your summary, and they're talking about 30 minutes, right?
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you're using your mask properly. You're using it all the time. It's fitting tightly. Any speaking that's going on needs to be done at a low conversational volume using
Mm,
amplification. Um, so preachers and readers, lectors need to know that. But then when we talk about time, they said one of the most important things that you can do is to limit sessions to 30 minutes. So, and
okay.
this is indoors or outdoors. Indoors, you're going to limit your rehearsal to 30 minutes. Then you need to exit the room, and there needs to be at least one complete air change in the room, and preferably 3 before anybody goes back in there.
Wow.
Now there are strategies. People said, well, I have rooms I could use for section rehearsals, so we could do 30 minutes all
Sure.
together and then split up and go to different rooms. Yeah, that's possible if you have that kind of space.
Right.
To
And
consider.
they're finding that's because the aerosols are remaining in the air that long.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
can.
Wow.
At first, we were just talking about droplets, which are
Right.
heavier and they tend to sink to the ground quickly, but the aerosols can remain airborne for quite some time
Yeah.
and create a risk. Now, if you're outdoors, that's better in all circumstances. That's what they're saying. Now, that works better in some climates than others.
Yeah.
Right now,
I live in Michigan. Beautiful now.
until this week in Virginia, it was in the 90s with 5,000% humidity. It felt like.
Yeah.
And in Nebraska, come winter, and if you have in Michigan, it's not outdoors is not an option.
Right.
But for places that can do that, it's always better, always safer. But even the interesting thing is, even if that's the fact, that you should still be doing 30-minute sessions and then let everyone disperse for at least 5 minutes.
Wow.
To give time for the air to clear, and then you can resume.
Well, something I have been saying for years is that we need to keep our sermons shorter. So here we go. This is one way to do that, because it's not just even for rehearsal, it's for church itself, right? I mean, it's for worship itself.
This is the interesting thing, because this study wasn't geared toward church specifically. Right. So they didn't specifically address that question, but all of this data, if you look at it carefully, you can assume that we need to be limiting the time of our church services. Yeah. And in the previous update that we received back in July, they were saying, 30 minutes is good, 45 minutes not so good, 60 minutes no.
Wow. Wow.
So it's hard, I think, to talk to people, to clergy and other lay leaders, and help them understand, well, it's not going to make that much difference if we just go to 45 minutes or 50 minutes.
Right.
Well, that's not what the scientists are telling us. The scientists are telling us that 30 minutes for now is the hard and fast limit.
Right. No, it's helpful to know. I mean, because clergy are trying to figure this out too. And I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, no. Again, it's you can go longer than 30 minutes, but you're increasing your risk dramatically if you do so. So It becomes a matter of making choices, right? And if you're on a leadership team working, clergy and musician to make decisions, and other lay leaders involved, hopefully in that, you have to kind of keep in mind these different categories we talked about, and how are you going to address each one? And if you take steps forward or back in one area, how does that impact the others?
Right. And it's risk mitigation, right?
Yes.
It's risk mitigation. That's what we're talking about.
One of the things you and I chatted about is a really interesting assessment tool that Tim Sharp from ACDA shared with the group at their recent webinar on this research, looking at measuring your inclination to take risk. It's very interesting study to be able to and I think it'd be interesting to share it among leadership team members, to see where you score on this spectrum. Whether you're a person who's naturally going to try to be more conservative in your choices, or if you're going to be freer about taking risks.
Right. And it's not just about musicians, right? I mean, this is risk mitigation in life, right?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So all of us, take risks, but, some of us are more able to do that than others by our basic personalities. And I think sometimes when we deal with some of the conflict about these issues, it comes down to partly that issue about how prone are we to take risk. And how can we use that information to talk about our differences in approaches?
Well, and we didn't really talk about this, but as we're talking, I think one of the important things to really understand too is that the folks that we work with, not just clergy, but singers, instrumentalists, the folks that we work with in our ministry, they need to know the risk that they are taking too. Mm-hmm. And how to mitigate it for themselves and why you're doing some of the things that you're, that you're doing.
It's okay for people to make choices.
Right.
People need to take care of themselves and decide what's right for them, for their family members.
Right. So what have you seen? Because, as president of AUM and in your role, and, before you were in Omaha, you were teaching at the University of the South. And so you have a wide network of folks that you are talking with and that you see what they're doing. What have you seen that's working right now? There's such a variety of things happening across the church. What do you see that's been effective?
Well, there are lots of different things that people are trying. This is really a time of experimentation, I think. Some people are doing really wonderful live stream productions. And some are using pre-recorded materials as well. Mm-hmm. So both of those approaches work, I think. Probably in the Episcopal Church, one of the best examples is Washington National Cathedral, which a lot of people have watched. I mean, they were set up to do this before the pandemic hit. So they were able to keep going at a very high level of production, what they're doing. And it's very effective, I think, both musically and liturgically. Other places are doing more modifications. At my former parish, they're doing a live stream liturgy, but the musical pieces are pre-recorded. I think maybe that's
okay. Yeah, that is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that can work very effectively. Mm-hmm. I know of another parish where they're doing morning prayer in small groups by neighborhood. So people are gathering in a pod, if you will, that stays together to have worship with a very small group on Sundays. And then they have a pre-recorded sermon and a pre-recorded choral anthem that people can access. Then they're suggesting that everyone can view the National Cathedral at 11:15. So those are some of the different things. Some places are doing outdoor liturgies to some success. We've seen some people doing drive-in liturgies. That's
been interesting, isn't it? I mean, we had a drive-in wedding here a little while ago that Amy and I attended, and it was we each had our iPhones up on our dashboard so that we could hear what was going on. It was really. Who would have thought that we would have been doing that?
No, yeah. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, I think we're at the point. At first, we thought we'd all be back in church by, Easter, Pentecost, fall.
Right.
Now it's stretching out further, and I think we'll be able to start thinking about what's really working and what isn't, making some decisions about that. We had a Zoom call with a number of our AUM members around the country a week or so ago, and we brought up the topic of what are we thinking about for Advent and Christmas.
Yeah.
And sort of this silence fell over the group.
None of us can quite handle that right now. I mean, it's
realizing that there's probably not going to be a normal Advent and Christmas this year. And how do we make good choices, and how do we care for our flock in the midst of all of this? It's a real challenge.
Yeah. I think it's been, a little bit I think about is we should have been, as church musicians and as the church, we should have been doing some of these things before. My parish didn't stream anything before this. Now that's what we do, and that's not leaving us. We will be streaming as long as that technology exists. I don't see that changing, and our reach has grown because of that.
Sure, there are people. I still watch Trinity Cathedral on Sunday mornings.
Yeah,
I planned all the music through Labor Day, so it's fun to see.
You're wanting to see how it goes,
even in my absence. But it's, there are people, watching from Europe. There are people watching from all over the United States, and not just watching, but participating in the prayers by mentioning names in the chat and actively engaged in what we're doing. And that's really very profound. It's a profound change for the church.
Yeah. I think in the chat there are some of the workshops that have been done with Jim Farwell at Virginia that are looking at various phases, within the church, and how to plan, how we can still be church in those times. It's a real, it's a real challenge. I mean, certainly never seen, anything like this in my time, and I'm sure you haven't in yours either.
Yeah. We've got that webinar coming up. I see it's in the comments, the link to the Eventbrite on Advent and Christmas. Talking about music and liturgy and planning, and I'm lucky enough to be involved in that, coming up on September 16th. We'd really enjoy everybody joining us. You can click on the link to register.
Great. Yeah, and that one, do you need to register ahead for that? Yeah. Okay, great.
If you register ahead, that means that you're going to get all of the materials. You get a link to a Google Doc with all the resources that we're going to provide. So
excellent.
And you'll see there's a price structure where you can join for $0, or if you want to pay a little bit and help fund the webinars that Lifelong Learning at VTS is doing, you can do that, but it's by no means required.
Yeah.
We'd rather have everybody there. So
sure.
Please do register. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, no, it's really, the fact that we are looking at Advent and Christmas now, and I, even on the St. James side, have started to, get our minds wrapped around what that's going to look like. And, we really don't know yet is the answer. But we were talking a little bit yesterday about how we can, what are some you were talking a little bit about some principles that you were thinking about in terms of what music we're using for Christmas, but particularly. But I was thinking that could even be this fall. What were you thinking about with that?
Well, I think first of all, less is more in many cases at this time. If we're not going to have choral singing with full choirs.
Yeah.
So, this is a good time to be using soloists, duets, cantors, and planning music that is smaller in scale, but equally effective and appropriate for the season. Also, I think that we need to think about Advent and Christmas, and particularly Christmas, that this is not going to be a year to do a big production, right?
Yeah.
We've all done those magnificent major choral works at Christmas, but it's not going to happen this year. And what people, I think, will really need and want are to hear the familiar carols, and perhaps maybe have a solo or two. But it's going to be a very different kind of Christmas. And I think we need to also think about what kind of music works on video, as opposed to thinking the way we normally. It's going to work in a full packed nave of people singing Silent Night. They're two different media, and we have to think creatively about how we can use video to its fullest advantage and plan accordingly.
So we were talking about that a little bit yesterday, and because we've seen, I would say varieties of things that have sometimes worked well, and maybe some things that haven't worked well in video. But I think maybe less is more in that way. That looking at maybe doing more unison singing and instead of the 4-part arrangements all the time and stuff like that is where we're wanting to be heading.
Yes, I think unison singing can be tremendously powerful. And it also has a level of symbolism, I think, in our current time. Singing together in unison is a marvelous thing. I think we want to try to give people the opportunity to sing along at home on those carols. I think that's going to be important. So oftentimes on video, that's easier hear and follow if it's a unison voice, a unison sound, rather than a fancy 4, 6, or 8 part arrangement.
Right. It's sort of the old rule, at least that I grew up with, which was, when you are processing, you sing in unison because, you don't want the tenor part being blasted at some poor congregant trying to sing the soprano line.
Yeah, I don't think a tenor made that rule, though.
No, and listen, as that is one of Simon's, golden rules, and it gets broken all the time in my place. So, I still try, but
one of the other big things that we haven't talked about yet is copyright and licensing, and that's been so difficult for so many churches and musicians. It seems like the musicians have ended up with that job in most places, and now it feels like we're stuck with it. It's super important, as I think we all know, that we give credit where credit is due and comply with the law, and it's a moral matter of supporting our composers and poets in the church whose work is so important to us. One of the great things about St. James Music Press is that all of your materials are available to stream. So all of the music I planned for the summer back at Trinity Cathedral is all from St. James Music Press.
Oh, that's great.
And it's so effective because we were able to find unison things, or even anthems that are in parts but could be easily converted to a unison solo piece. And the streaming is covered. So I felt not so bad about leaving them with all of that, because I knew it was all taken care of and it wouldn't fall on anybody else's shoulders. But it's just a tremendous resource. And then also, I could email, scores to people, recordings that I could share so they could prepare things on their own. I think it's just a marvelous resource. And I thank you. I think that, the publishing industry is going to be moving more in the direction that you've been leading.
I think so. I mean, St. James, even from before they were online, was doing things in a different way. And, here we are again, I think, out in the front in terms of streaming and being able to do that. We were talking a little bit about this because we use a lot of St. James material, both recordings and pieces, in our stream at St. John's. We still get dinged from time to time, and I'm the editor. And so trying to navigate how that all works has been a real trick for all of us, to get to do. And it's become a huge part of our job as church musicians, is to understand that. I thought we understood copyright before, but now, that's really the thing.
The licensing for live streams, it's a whole new topic that most of us are learning about. There's a great article on our website, which is anglicanmusicians.org, and I think there's probably a link somewhere in the chat. There will be soon, I'm sure. That is really one of the clearest outlines, I think, about copyright issues and licensing for live streaming that pertain to church music. It's very clear. I'd recommend it highly if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet.
Yep, I agree. It's really well done. And so it's, but again, we're all trying to figure this out together. We got dinged for a recording that my choir had done of the Mozart Laudate Dominum from the Vespers. And the copyright claim was from said it was too much like the King's College recording. And I thought, oh, if only, that would be fantastic, So
Mozart wants his check, by the way.
Right? I mean, anyway, it's going to be tricky and something that we're all figuring out, together, how we're dealing with that. I think that's a whole topic in itself, honestly, for what we're doing about copyright and how we're dealing with it. So
I also think church musicians need to exercise a lot of self-care in this time, because more and more is being laid on the music director's plate right now, I believe. That's nothing new, but I think a lot of people jumped in to try to help because they were able to do it when all of this started, but now they're looking at, handling all of the copyright issues. They're looking at handling all of the live streaming issues, the technology. In many places, I think people were doing virtual choirs, and that's great if that's your thing, but I don't think it really takes the place of choral singing, and it also takes a tremendous amount of time
Yes.
in terms of editing. And I think we just all need to be very careful to think about what really is the best use of our time and energy, what will be most effective in terms of developing our music program in our church and creating ministry through music.
Yeah, I was very lucky at St. John's that our priest is a former radio broadcaster. So he was very into the whole streaming and dealing with all of that. So I have been he's been taking a lot of that on himself, which has been wonderful because he's smarter at it than I am. But it has unfortunately fallen to musicians. And what I see, and I'm sure you do too, at is that people aren't even taking vacations. That, you know, they're producing all of this stuff when they would have taken a couple weeks off for vacation or continuing ed. That they aren't doing that.
Yeah, a lot of our continuing ed opportunities were canceled this summer in terms of conferences and things that usually are a chance to recharge and have that mountaintop experience that you can take the energy back to start your year. That didn't happen this year.
Yeah.
And you know, I think people are going to be paying a price for that. I mean, we have to be really careful to avoid burnout in this situation because that's not going to be helpful to anybody.
I think that's right. Yeah, hopefully clergy are listening, you know, to the, you know, we all need to be aware of that with each other too, you know, even with how we deal with each other. What you talked a little bit about, you know, having to cancel all our professional ed this summer. What challenges or opportunities do you see for going forward for the Association of Anglican Musicians? What direction do you think they're going?
Well, I think that technology changes all of our organizations as well. I mean, we've done all of our board meetings on Zoom this year, and that's worked really very well. You know, we may not be able in the years ahead to do as many in-person conferences, but even if we have to limit that in some way, I think there's a real opportunity here, and I'm trying to stay focused on the opportunities in this situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And stay positive, as you know, we all have days, but we all try to do that. I think we have an ability to reach a much wider audience by providing webinar content, by offering things that are going to be geared not just toward musicians in large churches, but making sure that we have resources for small and medium congregations. In the Episcopal Church, small congregations are the majority of our church, right? So making those materials available. Has a really great internship program where we fund a young musician to go work in a major church music program for a year and gain that valuable hands-on experience that's so important. I think we can find more ways to offer those training opportunities, not only by maybe offering more than one internship, but being able to offer some online educational resources and mentoring programs where we can help young musicians going into this field. And then also, one of the things that has really been working on in recent years is networking with other organizations of lay professional employees to think about policies that will create more equity for our lay employees in the church, and working together through general convention and through articles and general information to the public about the work that we do, to try to make better working conditions for everybody who's in this field.
It's been interesting to me to see just how important music has become. You know, I think those of us that are church musicians always felt, you know, music was so central to the life of the church. But now when it's been taken away in the traditional way that we have done it of gathering together, that's the thing that I hear about most. That people are missing that part of our life together as church folks, you know, and I think that that gives me a lot of hope for the future, you know, because I think the the recognition of how important it is is growing, rather than it was just something that was there for, a lot of people that sit in the pew every week. Now when it's not there, it's become a really vital thing,
One of my dear friends, William Bradley Roberts, who's the composer in your catalog,
Yep.
professor here at Virginia Theological Seminary, he's fond of saying that that every great church has great music. Now, there may be different styles of music,
sure,
but whatever it is, when it's a truly great church, there's great music. That's an integral piece of it.
Yeah.
And vice versa, where there's great music, you can build a great church. I think, as you said, people are understanding in new ways the importance of church music, and our challenge is to find new and creative ways to make it through this time. And I think we can do that, and that we can reach even more people.
Yeah, it's not changing. That piece has not changed. Great music still, to have a great church, you still got to have great music. I mean, that is not any. I don't think that's changed at all. That's still there. So we have talked a little bit about your hat for being president of Tell me a little bit about what you're going to be doing at Virginia Theological Seminary. What's the you follow in some big footsteps there, and so what do you see, and what's the day-to-day going to look like for you?
Well, I'll change hats now.
Yeah.
I have at least a threefold role here at the seminary. I will be teaching. So all of our seminarians take at least one church music course. So I'll be teaching all of them, which is exciting. And then I'll be offering other electives as well for those who want to go deeper in different areas. I'm involved in worship, so I am on the worship committee. We have a meeting tomorrow, as a matter of fact. We're planning ahead for this very unusual fall.
Yeah.
But I'll be the organist for most of the chapel service.
Oh, wow.
And then when we can have choir again, I'll be conducting the seminary choir. That won't be happening this semester, but we will be able to use keyboard instruments and hopefully some cantors to enrich our music for worship here at the seminary. And then the third piece has to do with lifelong learning. So I'm a faculty fellow on the lifelong learning team at Virginia Theological Seminary. So, for example, this webinar that we mentioned earlier, I'll be involved in that. There'll be an opportunity to offer educational resources for everyone through lifelong learning, and also music, liturgy, and the arts, which is a group under that umbrella of lifelong learning at VTS.
And that's already such an important resource. I mean, there's been a lot of work already done there. I'm thinking about when they were looking at the hymnal study and prayer book revision and all of that stuff. That has been a really important thing.
Yes, Johnston is the director of the music, liturgy, and the arts, and so I'm working closely with her. And if you go to the VTS website, you can find links to all of those conferences you mentioned are there. There are video links to material that was recorded in the past.
So just a quick question that's come up from the chat: is there a limit on the participants in the webinar coming up for Advent and Christmas?
I don't know of one. I'll ask that question and find out.
Okay.
But
good.
Everybody register, and we get up to some kind of limit, we'll just make it bigger.
Good. Bigger tent.
Can view it later too, I think, if they can't view it live. So.
Yeah. Cindy Lindeen Martin is asking for us to go back for a minute. So we talked about masking, and we talked about time, but we didn't really talk about distancing and airflow. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit to focus a bit more on that. Yeah,
I'd be happy to.
Great.
Again, I'd refer you to the document so you can see the points I summarized, but some of the things that I think are particularly important. Distancing, we're still following the CDC recommendation, which is 6 feet at least. That means a 6 by 6 foot square, so it's 36 square feet. The other thing that particularly pertains to choirs, and I think affects a lot of church choirs because of our architecture, is that we want everybody in straight lines facing the same direction.
Oh, so no facing each other.
Exactly.
No choir style then.
Cautioning against that. So
Okay.
not only do you have to find a way in your choir loft to get everybody with their 36 square feet of space, but they can't be pointed at each other. They all have to be pointed in the same direction.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a big thing for a lot of our churches. All of the usual stuff that I think people know about is, creating entrance and exit paths, doing all the sanitizing. It was also suggested, not in this particular research, but I've read in other places, that we keep written seating charts of who there, where they were sitting, on which dates, so that if there's ever, a positive case, we can do the contacting that we need to do. So one more thing on the music director's plate.
Yeah, here we go. Another thing to do, right?
Now, airflow is huge, so we can talk about that. And this is where we've really got to rely on experts and scientists. There are people who can come in and make these measurements in our buildings, and churches are not going to like this, but they're going to have to spend the money to have that kind of work done if they want to use their spaces to really evaluate where we all are with airflow, the air change rate, to see how that's operating in your building. HEPA filters, as somebody commented, are growing in importance. So looking at whether that can be installed as part of your HVAC system, or if you're in an older building, in an older choir room, maybe you can get a HEPA filter. There's data that is available that shows what kind of HEPA filters are most effective, the numbers that you'd find on the side of the box. So if this is something that affects you, you need to really do some research on it and enlist some professional help to evaluate your space, to see how safe you can make it.
Yeah, the air changes is a big thing, that how many changes of air. I keep hearing hospital rooms, are evaluated in that way, how many air changes they are doing. And we really need to be looking at our spaces in a similar way.
And there are all kinds of factors, like whether the air comes in from the top and goes out the bottom, or how the whole ventilation system is handled in a building and in a room. So I think most of us are going to have professional evaluations done. I know we've done that here at the seminary, but for smaller churches, that's an expense and it's difficult, but it's going to have to be done. Yeah,
I think that, and again, what we're talking about too is risk mitigation. It's not to say that it totally eliminates, the risk of spreading the virus, but these are ways that the research is telling us we can mitigate that risk.
If you have windows that open, one of the things they've said over and over again is anything to increase flow of fresh air, open the windows if they'll open.
Yeah.
And they also made the comment, which I included in my document, that avoid using rooms that don't have an HVAC system. I don't know about you, but I've worked in church choir and practice rooms that have a room air conditioner or whatever. If you don't have appropriate filtration, you should not be using that room right now.
Yeah, I work in a church that does not, so I understand exactly where you're coming from.
And of course, hygiene practices that we know, washing hands, sanitizing, all of those things. Those are really important for organists too, people who are sharing a console, to make sure we're following those kinds of protocols.
Yeah, if you're the only one playing the instrument, it's not that big a deal. But if you're sharing the console, then it becomes a thing. You've got to clean the instrument between.
I think all of our piano teachers, when we were 6 or 7 or 8 years old, told us to wash our hands before we sat on the piano.
No. She's there on my shoulder. Be sure that you do that. So Amy, would you mind sharing the link to her document one more time so that folks have that? Because I think that's so important that we have that. I want to and we talked a little bit about, the National Cathedral. Are there any other churches, since we're all, you've been moving across the country, and so you may not have had time to do this, but are you watching any other churches right now? Are you looking at things and going, that's really good what they're doing there?
As I mentioned, I've been watching Trinity Cathedral because I know everybody there. been watching Washington National Cathedral. Trinity Wall Street is doing an excellent job. I enjoy just popping around and finding different churches, churches that I've served in the past, churches where I know people who are working.
Yeah.
So that's always interesting. There's one of my dear friends from Sewanee who you may know, the Reverend Susanna Metz.
Oh, sure.
At a cluster of small congregations in England, rural congregations. And so she's been doing absolutely lovely videos that have beautiful photography of the fields and animals and these old parish churches. And what's really interesting that the Church of England is doing is the RSCM, St. Paul's Cathedral, St. Martin in the Fields have worked together to make videos of standard classic hymns and some more contemporary ones too, with the words included, the lyrics so people can follow along, beautiful video, and they're handling all of the copyright stuff for Church of England.
Wow.
And churches like Susanna's can pick those up and drop them into their video. And
what a good idea.
What an excellent idea,
Yeah.
And those are just fun to watch because it's like in this time when we can't travel, you can take a little vacation.
I know. That's the...
And have a rogation Sunday,
right?
A small parish. So that's been fun too, to be able to visit virtually some of my friends around the world.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing. I've been doing a similar thing of okay, who are we going to watch today, and seeing what's going on with that.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate you being here with us today. This has been so helpful to me. I know it's been helpful to others, and really, really grateful for all the work that you're doing to keep us all informed about, what we need to be informed about so that we can keep our people as safe as we can.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It's been a pleasure, and we're all just going to do our best to use this opportunity to be creative and to create new ways of being church. And I think there's a real opportunity for us as church musicians at this time. So let's encourage one another. And if anybody has questions and wants to contact me at Virginia Seminary, please do. You can find me through their website.
Great. Thanks again, Marty. Really appreciate your time, and best wishes for the new academic year. We're all going to need them, I think.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great to talk with you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Okay.